The moonflowers trembled. Aria's fingertips barely grazed the silver petals, yet they shivered like living things. Strange. Moonflowers only bloomed for royal blood, everyone knew that. But here they were, opening their faces to her touch as dawn painted the palace gardens gold. Must be dying, she whispered to herself, because the alternative was impossible. Still, warmth spread through her chest as the ancient blooms responded. For 17 years, she'd tended these gardens in silence. And for 17 years, she'd felt invisible, a ghost drifting between rose bushes and herb patches while her step-family lived their glittering lives above. The morning air carried honeysuckle and dew. Soon, the palace would wake. Soon, Lanessa would find new ways to remind her she didn't belong. Aria. She flinched. A servant boy raced past, his face flushed with excitement. The Alpha King's here. Unexpected visit. Lady Lanessa's losing her mind. Her stomach dropped. The Alpha King here? Aria glanced down at her dirt-stained dress, her calloused hands. Then she looked at the moonflowers, still glowing faintly in the growing light. Without warning, her wolf stirred. Just a flutter, like wings against her ribs. Impossible. Her wolf had been dormant since childhood, weak, useless. Yet something pulled at her chest, a golden thread she couldn't name. The servant's voice echoed across the courtyard. All staff to positions. He's touring the grounds. Panic seized her throat, because deep down, she knew the truth. Something was about to change, and change had never been kind to girls like her. Useless girl. Look at this jewelry, it's dull as mud. Lanessa's voice cracked like a whip across the opulent chambers. Aria kept her head down, polishing the emerald necklace until it gleamed. Around her, chaos bloomed. Servants rushed between wardrobes and vanity tables. Her stepmother barked orders while Lanessa preened before a mirror tall enough to hold 3 women. The Alpha King chooses his queen this season, stepmother said, adjusting Lanessa's bodice. This is your moment, darling, everything we've planned. I know, mother. Lanessa's reflection was perfect. Golden hair like spun silk, curves that made grown men stumble, a smile that could cut glass when necessary. But her hands shook as she reached for her powder. Aria noticed because she noticed everything from the shadows. How Lanessa's breathing quickened when nervous. How her left eye twitched when she lied. How desperation lurked beneath all that beauty. The necklace, Aria. Hurry. Cold emeralds slid against Aria's palms as she fastened the clasp. For a heartbeat, their eyes met in the mirror. Something flickered across Lanessa's face. Was it fear? Then her stepsister's mask snapped back into place. You'll stay hidden today. The Alpha King doesn't need to see. Servants. The word servants dripped with venom, as if Aria's father hadn't been noble blood, as if his death hadn't left her at their mercy. Of course, my lady. The response came automatically, hollow as a bell. What followed was the familiar ache in her chest, the place where her pride used to live. Because no matter how hard she tried, she'd learned to make herself smaller, quieter, invisible. Meanwhile, Lanessa's wolf purred with anticipation. Even Aria could sense it, the raw power that made her stepsister a perfect royal mate. Unlike me, he's in the East Wing, a messenger announced. Lanessa's smile turned predatory. Perfect.
The political meeting had been suffocating. Kai escaped through the palace's French doors, desperate for air that didn't reek of ambition and false promises. The garden spread before him like a green maze, and for the first time all morning, his wolf settled. He'd been Alpha King for 3 years. 3 years of choosing duty over desire, politics over peace. But tonight was the mating ceremony. Tonight, he'd have to choose a queen from a parade of eager she-wolves who saw only his crown. None of them matter, his wolf whispered. None of them call to us. That's what terrified him most. The evening light painted everything gold as he wandered deeper into the gardens. Ancient oaks stretched overhead, their branches heavy with secrets. Then he rounded a corner and stopped. A girl knelt among the moonflowers. Not just any girl. Her, the one who moved like water, dark hair catching starlight even in daylight. She touched the flowers with reverence, and they, responded, bloomed brighter, trembled with life. Impossible. Moonflowers only opened for Luna blood. She must have sensed him because she looked up. Their eyes met across the garden path, and, goddess, his wolf slammed against his ribs like caged lightning. Every instinct screamed mate so loudly he nearly staggered. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that. Her soul called to his across the space between them, and suddenly, nothing else existed. Wide brown eyes stared back at him, shocked, afraid, awakening. He could smell it the moment her dormant wolf stirred to life. Sweet jasmine and wild honey, the scent that would haunt his dreams. She started to speak. Then she bolted. Kai stood frozen as she disappeared into the hedgerows, leaving only her scent and the echo of recognition that would change everything. His wolf howled one word. Mine.
Hidden among the hedge maze, Lanessa watched her world crumble. The Alpha King stood statue still where Aria had fled, his face transformed by something Lanessa had never seen before. Wonder, hunger, recognition. No, 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 no. Her perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms as the truth crashed over her. That look, the way his wolf had surged, how his entire body had gone taut with need, she'd seen it in the stories. Read about it in the ancient texts. A mate bond. With Aria, panic clawed at her throat because this couldn't be happening. She'd prepared her whole life for this moment. Trained in politics and pleasure, studied bloodlines and pack law. She was perfect for him, beautiful, connected, powerful. But fate didn't care about perfection. "My lady?" A servant appeared beside her. "Your mother is looking for—" "Shut up." The words came out sharp enough to draw blood. The servant fled, leaving Lanessa alone with her fury. Because despite everything, every lesson, every sacrifice, every calculated smile, she was about to lose to the girl who emptied chamber pots. Unless... A slow smile curved her lips, cruel, calculating. Because Aria might be fated to be queen, but she didn't know it yet. And fated or not, you couldn't claim what you weren't present to receive. The mating ceremony was tomorrow night. All she needed was to ensure Aria never made it to the selection. A sleeping draft in her evening tea. Simple, effective. And by the time anyone realized what happened, Lanessa would already wear the crown. After all, the Alpha King couldn't choose a mate who wasn't there. Her wolf purred with satisfaction, already tasting victory. Soon after, she would be queen. And Aria? Aria would learn that fairy tales were just stories good girls told themselves before the world broke their hearts. The moonflowers had closed their petals, as if the garden itself sensed the darkness she carried. Perfect. The tea tasted bitter tonight. Aria set down the delicate porcelain cup, her stomach churning. Strange Lanessa had been unusually kind today, bringing her chamomile tea and honey cakes while she prepared for the evening's ceremony. Not that Aria was attending. Servants didn't get invited to royal mating rituals. Still, something fluttered in her chest every time she thought about tomorrow. About amber eyes and the impossible way those moonflowers had responded to her touch. Just nerves, she whispered to her reflection. The mirror showed a girl in a simple gray dress, hair braided down her back. Nothing special, nothing that would catch a king's attention. Yet her skin felt too tight, like something wanted to break free from beneath. Her wolf. It had been stirring all day, restless and eager in ways that made no sense. The ceremony's starting, she thought, glancing toward the palace windows where golden light spilled across marble floors. Somewhere below, eligible she-wolves would present themselves to the Alpha King. One of them, probably Lanessa, would catch his eye, and Aria would remain exactly what she'd always been, invisible. The bitter taste in her mouth grew stronger. Her eyelids felt heavy, weighted with exhaustion that came from nowhere, because deep down, she knew the truth. She wanted something she had no right to want. Him, the king with eyes like molten gold. Foolish girl. Her stepmother's voice echoed in her mind. Know your place. Her place was here, in the shadows, always in the room spun violently. Aria gripped the vanity as her knees buckled, and through the haze of sudden drowsiness, understanding crashed over her. The tea. No. The word slurred from her lips as consciousness slipped away like water through her fingers. Because tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight, fate might have chosen her. But as darkness claimed her, she heard the distant sound of ceremony drums beginning to beat, without her.
She wasn't there. Kai stood on the ceremonial dais, watching she-wolf after she-wolf present herself for his consideration. Beautiful faces, perfect bloodlines, political advantages that would strengthen his reign. None of them mattered. His wolf paced like a caged beast, searching the crowd for jasmine and wild honey, for brown eyes that had awakened something primal in his chest. But the girl from the gardens, his mysterious flower whisperer, was nowhere to be found. "Your Majesty?" Lady Linessa stepped forward, golden hair gleaming under the chandeliers. She was stunning, he could admit that. Everything a queen should be. His wolf didn't even lift its head. "Perhaps you'd like to dance?" she offered, her smile practiced and perfect. But instead of answering, Kai found himself scanning the crowd again. Where is she? The pull in his chest had been growing stronger all day, an invisible thread connecting him to someone who wasn't here. "I need a moment," he announced, stepping down from the dais. Shocked murmurs followed him as he strode from the ballroom. This wasn't how mating ceremonies worked. The Alpha King was supposed to choose, tonight, from the eligible females present. Yet something was wrong. His instincts screamed it. The thread in his chest tugged him through palace corridors he barely knew, up servant staircases and past tapestried walls. His wolf guided him like a compass pointing true north, and soon after, he stood before a simple wooden door in the servants' quarters. Her scent was stronger here, but underneath it, something else, something chemical and wrong. He knocked. No answer. The pull in his chest became agony. "Forgive me," he murmured, and tried the handle. The door opened to reveal a small, neat room. And there, collapsed beside her vanity in a pool of gray fabric, lay the girl who'd haunted his thoughts. "No." The word tore from his throat as he dropped to his knees beside her. She was breathing, but barely. Her pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. As if fate demanded it, his fingers found the teacup on her table. He lifted it to his nose and growled. Sleeping draft. Someone had drugged his mate.
Warmth pulled her back to consciousness. Strong arms cradled her against a chest that rumbled with protective fury. Aria's eyes fluttered open to find amber fire staring down at her, and suddenly the world made sense in ways that terrified her. The Alpha King, in her room, holding her like she mattered. "You came," she whispered, her voice thick with the remnants of whatever had stolen her consciousness. "Always." The word was a vow. Someone drugged you. Reality crashed back. The bitter tea, the ceremony she'd missed, her chance at what? What had she even been hoping for? "I don't understand," she said, but that was a lie. Because looking into his eyes, feeling the way her wolf sang in recognition, understanding bloomed like those impossible moonflowers. "Mott, you feel it too," he said, and it wasn't a question. His hand cupped her face with reverence that made her chest ache. The pull, the recognition. She nodded because denial was pointless. Whatever this was between them, this golden thread that hummed with rightness, it was real, undeniable, and completely impossible. "I'm nobody," she breathed. "You can't, I mean, there are rules." "Rules?" His laugh was dark silk. "Rules say I choose my mate during the ceremony. Rules say bloodlines matter more than bonds. But my wolf doesn't care about rules. Neither did hers, apparently. Because as his scent wrapped around her pine and storm and something essentially him, her dormant wolf stretched and purred. "This is madness," she whispered. "Then we'll be mad together." Before either could speak again, he leaned down. His lips found hers in a kiss that tasted like claiming and forever. Heat bloomed beneath her skin as his wolf called to hers, and suddenly she understood why moonflowers opened to her touch. Because she wasn't nobody. She was his. When he lifted his head, his eyes had gone completely golden. "Mine," he growled. And before she could think, before fear could stop her, she heard herself whisper back, "Yours." The mark burned against her throat like liquid fire, and Aria's world tilted on its axis. She belonged to the Alpha King, and he belonged to her. The scream that tore from Linessa's throat could have shattered crystal. She stood in her doorway, still wearing her ceremonial gown from the failed mating ceremony, staring at the scene that destroyed everything. The Alpha King, in Aria's room, marking her. The scent of fresh mating bonds filled the corridor like a mockery. "No!" The word ripped from her chest as she stumbled forward, but it was too late. Already, she could see the claiming mark blooming against Aria's throat like a brand. Kai's head snapped up, his golden eyes still blazing with possessive satisfaction. "Lady Linessa." His voice was arctic, polite, dismissive. "This isn't possible," she gasped, because her perfect plan had been foolproof. The sleeping draft should have kept Aria unconscious until dawn. The ceremony should have proceeded without her. Linessa should be wearing that mark. "Quite possible," Kai said, standing with Aria still in his arms. "Since it just happened." The casual way he said it, like marking a servant girl, was perfectly normal, made Linessa's vision blur with rage. Because she'd spent years perfecting herself for this moment. Years of training and sacrifice and careful positioning. All for nothing. But the bloodlines, she tried desperately. The politics, father always said. "Your father isn't Alpha King." Each word fell like a stone. "I am, and I've made my choice." Aria stirred in his arms, those doe eyes opening to focus on Linessa with something that might have been pity. Pity. As if she was the pathetic one. "I should congratulate you both," Linessa managed, though the words tasted like ash. "How unexpected." Kai's wolf rumbled a warning at her tone, but Aria touched his chest gently. Always so gentle, so kind. It made Linessa want to scream. "Perhaps we should discuss this later," Aria said softly. "When emotions aren't so high?" Linessa's laugh cut through the air like breaking glass. "Oh, darling, my emotions are perfectly controlled." Because despite everything, every shattered dream, every ruined plan, she wasn't finished yet. The mate bond was fresh, fragile, and Aria had no idea how to be queen. Time would tell if love could survive the crown. Soon after, Linessa would make sure it couldn't. "Enjoy your fairy tale," she said, dropping a perfect curtsy, "while it lasts." Her smile was poison wrapped in silk. The silk gown felt like wearing someone else's skin. Aria stood before the mirror in what had been Linessa's chambers, now hers. Apparently, while 3 seamstresses fussed over the emerald dress that cost more than most people earned in a year. The mark on her throat still burned like a brand, visible proof that her life had transformed overnight. "Your Majesty needs to hold still," the head seamstress murmured, adjusting the bodice with reverent fingers. "Your Majesty." The title made Aria's stomach flip because yesterday she'd been emptying chamber pots, and today she was supposed to know how to rule a kingdom. "I don't know the first thing about being Luna," she whispered to her reflection. The girl staring back looked like a stranger. Clean hair that caught the light like polished wood, skin that glowed with the aftermath of claiming, eyes that held secrets she'd never possessed before. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Come in." Kai entered, and the seamstresses scattered like startled birds. Even in simple riding clothes, he commanded attention. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, and when those amber eyes found hers in the mirror, her wolf purred with satisfaction. "Mine. You look." He moved behind her, hands settling on her shoulders with possessive gentleness. "Perfect." "I look terrified," she corrected, leaning into his warmth despite herself. His chuckle vibrated through his chest. "That makes 2 of us." The admission surprised her. Alpha Kings weren't supposed to feel uncertain, but when she met his eyes in the reflection, she saw something vulnerable there. "The council wants to meet you," he said quietly. "Today. To discuss political implications." Of course they did, because she was nobody special, and he was supposed to choose alliances over heart. "What if they don't accept me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Instead of answering immediately, Kai spun her to face him. His hands framed her face with careful reverence, thumbs tracing her cheekbones like she was made of precious things. "Then they'll learn that their Alpha King chose his mate for reasons beyond politics." His voice dropped to a growl that made her pulse race. And if they don't like it? You'll what? She challenged, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. His smile was all predator. I'll remind them why I'm alpha.
The forest called to them both. Under the full moon silver light, Kai felt his wolf surge with restless energy. Beside him, Aria shifted nervously, her new silk dress replaced with simple riding clothes that better suited their midnight hunt. Are you sure about this? She asked, eyeing the tree line. My wolf is barely. Trust me. He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. The contact sent electricity up his arm, the mate bond humming with satisfaction. They walked deeper into his territory, where ancient oaks stretched towards star-scattered skies. Here, away from palace politics and watching eyes, they could simply be what they were. Mates, tell me about your wolf, he said, genuinely curious. Most shifters experience their first change in adolescence, but hers remained stubbornly dormant. There's nothing to tell. Her voice carried old shame. She's weak, always has been. My stepfamily used to joke that I was more human than wolf. Rage flickered through his chest at the casual cruelty, but he kept his voice gentle. What do you think? I think. She paused, then surprised him with honesty. I think maybe she was just waiting. For what? For you. The simple words hit him like a physical blow. Because looking at her now, really looking, he could sense the power sleeping beneath her skin. Not weak, protected, hidden until the right moment. Show me, he whispered. I don't know how. Close your eyes. He moved behind her, hands settling on her shoulders. Feel the moon. Feel me. Feel the bond between us and let it guide you. She trembled, but not from fear, from anticipation. And as the moonlight painted them both silver, something shifted in the air around them. There, her wolf stirred, not the weak flutter he'd sensed before, but something magnificent, ancient, powerful. Oh, she breathed, and when she opened her eyes, they glowed with inner light. Soon after, the change took her. Bones stretched and reformed with liquid grace, rather than the usual painful snapping. Her wolf emerged like a revelation, silver-white fur that caught moonlight like captured starfire, eyes that held depths he was only beginning to understand. She was beautiful. His own wolf demanded release, and moments later they ran together through forests that sang their names.
The letter appeared on her breakfast tray like a coiled snake. Aria stared at the elegant handwriting, her name flowing across expensive paper in familiar script. She'd been queen for exactly 3 days, and already the political games had begun, because deep down, she knew the truth. This was only the beginning. Your Majesty? Her lady's maid hovered nearby, clearly curious about the mysterious correspondence. Thank you, Elena. That will be all. Alone in her chambers, Aria broke the wax seal with trembling fingers. The words inside made her blood turn to ice. My dear Aria, how wonderful that you've found happiness. Though I can't help but wonder, does the king know about your midnight meetings with Thomas, the stable hand? How his letters profess such devotion? Perhaps it's best if certain truths remain buried. After all, you wouldn't want to disappoint your new husband, a concerned friend. The parchment fluttered from her nerveless fingers. Thomas, the stable boy who'd been kind to her during her servant days, she'd helped him with reading lessons, nothing more. They'd shared perhaps a dozen conversations over the years. But someone had been watching, taking notes. And now, Aria? Kai's voice called through the door. The council meeting. He stopped speaking the moment he saw her face. Without warning, those amber eyes turned predatory as his wolf sensed her distress. What happened? Nothing. The lie came automatically because how could she explain? How could she prove innocence against shadows and implications? Yet, even as she spoke, doubt crept in. Because she was nobody special. A servant girl who'd somehow caught a king's attention. What if he began to wonder if his choice had been a mistake? Aria, his voice went dangerously soft. What happened? She wanted to tell him. Wanted to trust that he'd believe her over anonymous accusations. But the letter had done its job, planting seeds of insecurity that took root in soil already prepared by years of being told she wasn't worthy. Someone knows about my past, she said carefully. About friendships that might be misinterpreted. Something flickered across his face, too fast to read, but they're long enough to make her heart clench. Doubt? Just for a second. Just long enough for the poison to work. I see, he said, and suddenly the space between them felt infinite. The first crack had formed. Perfection required patience. Lanessa watched from her hidden alcove as the Alpha King strode past, his expression thunderous. Behind him, Aria followed with tears, threatening to spill down her cheeks. Their first fight, and it had been deliciously easy to orchestrate. One letter, one tiny seed of doubt. My lady? Her personal maid approached with cautious steps. Should I prepare your afternoon dress? The blue silk, Lanessa murmured, never taking her eyes from the royal couple's retreating forms. And send word to Marcus in the stables. I may have more correspondence for him to deliver, because this was only the beginning. Aria might wear the crown, but she had no idea how to keep it, how to navigate court politics or protect herself from enemies she couldn't see coming. And there were so many enemies now. Noble families who'd expected political marriages were furious. Eligible she-wolves felt cheated of their chance at power. The old guard whispered about bloodlines and proper breeding. All Lanessa had to do was fan the flames. Tell Cook I'll be dining alone tonight, she added, a slow smile curving her lips. I have letters to write. Anonymous letters, forged correspondences, carefully placed rumors that would grow like cancer in Aria's perfect fairy tale. Because love was beautiful, but politics were forever. Soon after, she'd have her crown back. And this time, no one, not fate, not the mate bond, not those ridiculous moonflowers would stand in her way. The king might have chosen his heart, but hearts were such fragile things, especially when they were broken. Her reflection in the window smiled back at her, beautiful and cold as winter morning. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. As if fate whispered its approval, thunder rumbled in the distance. Perfect. Even the weather understood that storms were coming.
The argument had been building for days. Kai slammed the council chamber doors behind him, fury radiating from every line of his body. 3 weeks of marriage, and already the vultures were circling. Whispers about Aria's questionable past. Anonymous letters questioning her bloodline. Suggestions that perhaps the Alpha King had been hasty in his choice. Enough, he growled, finding Aria in their shared chambers. She stood by the window, moonlight painting her profile silver. Beautiful. Fragile. His. But for how long? The council wants you to renounce the bond, she said without turning around. Her voice was steady, but he could smell the salt of unshed tears. The council can go to hell. That got her attention. She spun to face him, eyes flashing with rare anger. They're your advisors. They're supposed to serve their Alpha King. He cut her off, stalking closer, not dictate his personal life. Personal? Her laugh was bitter. Nothing about us is personal anymore, Kai. Every smile, every touch, every decision gets dissected by people who want me gone. The pain in her voice made his wolf snarl with protective rage, but underneath it, he heard something else. Doubt. She was pulling away, building walls to protect herself from the constant attacks. He couldn't let her retreat. Look at me, he commanded, voice dropping to the tone that made lesser wolves submit. She lifted her chin defiantly instead. Don't you dare use your alpha voice on me. There. The fire he'd fallen in love with. The strength that made her worthy of standing beside him. Then stop acting like you don't belong here. He backed her against the wall, hands bracing on either side of her head. Stop letting them make you doubt what we have. What if they're right? The words were barely a whisper. What if you made a mistake? He silenced her with his mouth, pouring 3 weeks of frustration and fear into a kiss that tasted like claiming and desperation. She melted against him, walls crumbling as their bond flared to life. This was real. Everything else was noise. You're mine, he growled against her lips. Crown or no crown, politics be damned. Mine. Prove it, she challenged breathlessly. So I did.
The garden meeting was supposed to be innocent. Aria hurried through the maze of hedgerows, clutching the note that had summoned her. Thomas needs help. Urgent. Meet by the old oak. A friend. She'd hesitated before coming, but the stable boy had been kind during her servant days. If he was in trouble. Because deep down, she knew the truth. Kindness had always been her weakness. The ancient oak stood at the garden's heart, its massive trunk scarred by centuries of storms. Thomas waited beneath its branches, but something was wrong. His usual easy smile was strained, and he kept glancing around like a hunted animal. "Thomas?" She approached cautiously. "What's the matter?" "My lady, I mean, Your Majesty." He stumbled over the title, face flushing with embarrassment. "I shouldn't have asked you to come, but I didn't know who else." "What's wrong?" She reached out instinctively as he swayed on his feet. That's when she saw the blood seeping through his shirt. A knife wound, shallow but painful. Someone had hurt him. Who did this? Anger flared in her chest. Thomas was gentle, harmless, the kind of person who rescued injured birds and shared his lunch with stray dogs. "Don't know," he gasped, leaning heavily against the tree. "Came at me from behind. Said it was a warning." Without thinking, Aria moved to support him, her arm sliding around his waist to keep him upright. His blood stained her white dress, but she didn't care. Someone was targeting people connected to her. "Lanessa, we need to get you to the healer," she said, helping him take a step toward the palace. "Don't move." The voice cut through the evening air like a blade. Aria's blood turned to ice as she turned to see Kai standing at the edge of the clearing, amber eyes blazing with fury. But his rage wasn't directed at their attacker. It was focused on her, on the way she held Thomas, on the blood painting her dress, on what this looked like to eyes already poisoned by suspicion. "Kai, it's not," she started. "What it looks like." His voice was arctic, controlled. "Dangerous. Because it looks like my wife meeting secretly with another man. A man she conveniently forgot to mention when I asked about her past." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "He's hurt. Someone attacked him. How convenient." Each word dripped venom. "And you just happened to be here to comfort him." Thomas tried to speak, to explain, but Kai's alpha presence pressed down like a suffocating weight. The stable boy could barely breathe, let alone defend anyone. This was the trap, perfectly orchestrated to look like betrayal. And Aria realized with growing horror that no explanation would matter, not when doubt had already taken root. "You don't trust me," she whispered. And it wasn't a question. Something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, but his wolf was too enraged to listen to reason. "Should I?" he asked coldly. The question shattered something inside her chest, because after everything the mate bond, their wedding night, whispered promises under moonlight, he still saw her as the servant girl who might betray him for scraps, just like everyone else.
The silence in their chambers could have cut glass. Kai stood at the window, watching storm clouds gather over his territory. Behind him, Aria moved through their evening routine with mechanical precision. No words, no glances, no acknowledgement that he existed. 3 days since the garden incident. 3 days of Arctic politeness and careful distance. His wolf paced restlessly, torn between protective fury and growing regret. Because the more he replayed that scene, the more details emerged that didn't fit the betrayal narrative. Thomas's genuine pain, the way Aria had positioned herself to support his weight, not embrace him. The stark terror in her eyes when she'd seen Kai's face. But he'd seen what he'd seen. "The council met today," he said finally, breaking the suffocating quiet. "I'm sure they did." Her tone was neutral, empty. It made his chest ache in ways he didn't want to examine. "They're pleased with recent developments." She paused in brushing her hair, meeting his eyes in the mirror with something that might have been bitter amusement. "Of course they are. Your unsuitable wife showing her true colors must be such a relief." "Aria?" "No." She turned to face him, and for the first time in days, real emotion blazed in her dark eyes. "You don't get to Aria me. Not after what you said." "I was angry. The situation looked like exactly what your council wanted it to look like," she finished. "And you fell for it perfectly." The accusation hit home because she was right. He had wanted to see betrayal. Some part of him had been waiting for proof that she was too good to be true, because kings didn't get fairy tales. You could have explained, he said weakly, to someone who'd already made up his mind. Her laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. You saw what you expected to see. A servant girl overstepping her bounds. You're my queen. Am I? The question hung between them like a challenge, because your reaction suggested otherwise. She was right, and they both knew it. In that moment of fury, he'd seen not his beloved mate but a potential threat to his reign. The politics had won over the personal, just like his council wanted, just like he'd been trained to let them. What do you want from me? The words came out harsher than intended. Nothing, she said quietly. I want nothing from you anymore. The finality in her voice made his wolf howl in protest. But Kai was too proud, too wounded by his own mistakes, to reach for her. Soon after, they would both learn the price of stubborn hearts.
Victory tasted like expensive wine and bitter satisfaction. Lanessa lounged in her private chambers, watching through her window as storm clouds gathered over the palace. How fitting. The tempest outside matched the chaos she'd orchestrated within these walls. Phase 1. Complete. The garden incident had exceeded her wildest expectations. Marcus, the guard she'd bribed to play Thomas's attacker, had performed beautifully. A shallow cut, just enough blood to sell the story, then a hasty retreat into the shadows. And Aria, sweet, predictable Aria, had rushed to help exactly as expected, because some people never learned. The king's reaction had been even better than hoped. That flash of possessive rage, the immediate assumption of betrayal, proof that beneath all his pretty words about love and fate, he was still an alpha male who viewed his mate as property. My lady? Her maid entered with fresh correspondence. More letters arrived. Phase 2. Beginning. The real work started now. Because doubt was just the seed she needed to cultivate it into full-blown paranoia. Make Kai question every smile, every gesture, every moment of happiness he'd found with his unsuitable bride. She broke the first seal, scanning reports from her network of palace spies, guards who noted Aria's every movement, servants who reported on conversations, noble families eager to see the upstart queen fall from grace. All of them useful, all of them hungry for chaos. Draft responses to Lords Garrett and Blackwood, she instructed. Tell them their patience will be rewarded. Soon. Because the kingdom was already fracturing. Northern territories questioned Aria's legitimacy. Southern lords whispered about bloodline purity. Eastern clans threatened to withdraw trade agreements unless the king chose a proper queen. All it would take was one more push. One final manipulation to break what remained of the royal couple's trust. And Lanessa had the perfect plan brewing. After all, love was beautiful, but power was practical. And she'd always been a practical girl. The storm outside intensified, rain lashing against her windows like tears. How poetic. Soon, she'd make sure the Alpha King and his precious mate had real reasons to weep. As thunder crashed overhead, Lanessa smiled. Let the final act begin. The council chamber felt like a courtroom. Aria sat at the polished oak table, surrounded by 12 pairs of eyes that ranged from disapproving to openly hostile. At the head of the table, Kai presided with the cold authority of a king rather than the warmth of a husband. When had he stopped being hers? Your Majesty, Lord Garrett began, his voice dripping false courtesy. Recent incidents have raised concerns about the stability of our leadership. Translation. Your wife is a liability. The Northern Territories are threatening secession, added Lady Blackwood. They question the legitimacy of a queen with such humble origins. Each word was carefully chosen to wound. Aria kept her expression neutral, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Because deep down, she knew the truth. This had been inevitable from the moment she'd accepted Kai's mark. You can't make a silk purse from a sow's ear. Her stepmother's voice echoed through memory with cruel precision. The solution is simple, Lord Garrett continued. Annul the mating bond, choose a queen worthy of... Enough! Kai's voice cut through the air like a blade, but when Aria looked for support in his amber eyes, she found only weary resignation. He was tired of fighting for her. Perhaps, he said slowly, we should consider a trial separation, temporary, of course, until the political situation stabilizes. The words hit like physical blows. Trial separation. Pretty words for what everyone in this room really wanted her gone. How long? She asked quietly. 6 months, maybe a year. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Just until you find someone better suited to your needs? The question escaped before she could stop it. Raw with pain she'd tried so hard to hide. Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Because they both knew the truth, this wasn't temporary. This was the beginning of the end. The kingdom comes first, he said finally. Of course it did. It always had. She'd just been foolish enough to believe love might matter more than politics. Then I'll make this easy for you, she said, rising from her chair with as much dignity as she could muster. I renounce my claim to the throne. Gasps echoed through the chamber, but Aria only had eyes for Kai, for the shock, and something that might have been grief flickering across his face. Too little, too late. Aria, wait. But she was already walking away, spine straight, despite the way her world crumbled with each step. Soon after, she would be gone, and the Alpha King could choose duty over love, just like he'd always been meant to.
She was packing. Kai stood in the doorway of their chambers, watching Aria fold simple dresses into a worn traveling case. She'd discarded every gift he'd given her, the silk gowns, the jewels, even the golden circlet that had marked her as his queen, as if none of it had ever mattered. You don't have to leave, he said, hating how hollow his voice sounded. Don't I? She didn't look up from her packing. Your council made their position quite clear, and you made yours. The accusations stung because it was true. In that moment when political pressure became unbearable, he'd chosen the easier path. The safe one. The coward's way out. This isn't what I wanted, he said desperately. Isn't it? Now she did look at him, dark eyes blazing with pain and fury. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you got exactly what you wanted. An excuse to let me go. That's not true? Her laugh was sharp enough to draw blood. Then why aren't you fighting? Why aren't you telling your precious council that your mate is more important than their political games? Because I'm afraid. The admission sat in his throat like poison, too shameful to speak aloud. Because a king who chose love over duty was weak, and he couldn't afford to be weak. The kingdom needs stability, he said instead. The kingdom needs a leader who stands by his choices. She slammed the case shut with finality that made his chest ache. But I suppose we can't all be what we need to be. The words hit like daggers because they were true. He wasn't the leader his people needed. He was a man who'd found his other half, and been too afraid to fight for her when it mattered. Aria, please. Please what? Tears threatened at the corners of her eyes, but her voice remained steady. Please stay and watch you marry someone more suitable. Please smile, and pretend my heart isn't breaking, because that's what would happen next. The council would parade eligible she-wolves before him until he chose one who fit their perfect political mold. And Aria would have to watch it all happen, unless she left first. Where will you go? The question escaped before he could stop it. Does it matter? She lifted her case, meeting his eyes one last time. You made your choice, Kai. Now live with it. The door closed behind her with soft finality, and Kai was left alone with the ghost of Jasmine and wild honey. His wolf howled in the silence.
The wedding announcement came 3 weeks after she'd left. Aria stood in the market square of a small border town, staring at the royal proclamation nailed to the message board. His Majesty the Alpha King announces his engagement to Lady Linessa of House Blackthorn. The ceremony will take place at the next full moon. So soon. Her hands trembled as she traced the formal words. 3 weeks. That's how long their love had lasted once she'd removed herself from the equation. Because deep down, she knew the truth she'd never really been his choice. Just a moment of madness he'd recovered from quickly enough. Miss? A vendor touched her arm gently. You look pale. Are you well? She forced a smile, backing away from the proclamation like it carried plague. Fine. Thank you. But she wasn't fine. She was dying by inches, the severed mate bond bleeding her soul drop by drop. Some nights, she could barely breathe through the pain of their separation. And now this. Soon after, Lanessa would wear the crown that should have been hers, would share his bed, bear his children, rule at his side. Everything Aria had dreamed of during those brief, shining weeks when she'd believed in fairy tales. How perfectly it had all worked out. Her steps carried her to the inn where she'd been staying, working in the kitchens to pay for room and board. Honest work, simple work, the kind of life she'd always been meant for. So why did it feel like dying? In her small room above the tavern, she pressed her hand to the window and stared north toward the capital, toward the palace where her heart still lived, even if her body had fled. "Be happy," she whispered to the wind, hoping somehow he might hear. "Be the king they need you to be," even if it meant forgetting her completely. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Aria closed her eyes against tears that fell like rain. The Alpha King had made his choice, and it would never be her.
The engagement ceremony was a perfect political theater. Kai stood beside Lanessa on the palace balcony, watching crowds cheer their future queen. She looked radiant in cloth of gold, every inch the royal bride his council had demanded. Beautiful, connected, suitable, and utterly wrong. His wolf lay dormant in his chest, refusing to acknowledge the woman at his side. When Lanessa had accepted his proposal delivered with all the passion of a business transaction, she'd tried to kiss him. His body had recoiled so violently he'd barely managed to disguise it as royal protocol. No touching until the wedding night. As if he could ever touch her the way he'd touched Aria. As if anyone could replace the girl who'd awakened his dormant heart. "Smile, darling," Lanessa murmured through her own practiced expression. "The people expect happiness." Happiness. The word tasted like ash. Because happiness lived in a border town inn, working in kitchens to survive while he played king with a woman who felt like ice in his arms. "Of course," he replied, managing the expected expression. Below them the crowd roared approval. Northern lords nodded with satisfaction. Southern territories sent congratulations. Eastern clans renewed trade agreements. Perfect politics. "Your Majesty seems distant lately," Lanessa observed as they waved to their subjects. Wedding nerves? More like wedding dread. But he couldn't say that. Couldn't admit that every night he dreamed of jasmine and wild honey, that food tasted like dust and wine like water, that the mate bond, stretched thin by distance and denial, was slowly killing him. Simply focused on the kingdom's needs, he lied. Her smile sharpened slightly. "How admirable. Though I hope after our wedding, you'll focus on other needs as well." The suggestion made his skin crawl, but he managed a non-committal noise that seemed to satisfy her, because this was his life now. Duty over desire, politics over passion, a crown that grew heavier each day while his heart withered in his chest. As the ceremony concluded, and they retreated into the palace, Kai caught a familiar scent on the evening breeze. For one wild moment, he hoped, but jasmine flowers bloomed in many gardens. And Aria was gone, by his choice, his cowardice, his greatest mistake. Soon after the wedding, he'd have to consummate a bond that felt like betrayal. And somewhere in a distant town, his true mate would learn that her replacement had claimed what was never really hers to give. The crown was hollow without the right queen to share it. But it was too late now for regrets, wasn't it? As if fate whispered doubt, his wolf stirred for the first time in weeks. Restless, hopeful, wrong.
The cabin felt like a tomb. Aria sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at hands that shook no matter how tightly she clasped them. 3 months since she'd fled to this remote mountain cottage. 3 months of surviving on stubborn pride and fading hope. 3 months of dying by inches. Her wolf had gone silent weeks ago, retreating so deep she wondered if it still existed. The severed mate bond was a constant ache, like breathing with broken ribs. Some mornings, she could barely summon the energy to rise. What was the point? Outside, snow fell in thick curtains, trapping her in isolation that matched her soul. The nearest village was a day's ride through treacherous passes, not that she had anywhere to go. No family who wanted her. No friends who'd risk association with a disgraced queen. Just endless, echoing silence. The wedding had been 2 weeks ago. She'd heard about it from a traveling merchant who'd stopped for shelter, his casual mention of the beautiful ceremony hitting like a physical blow. Lady Lynessa, now Queen Lynessa, radiant in her crown. Aria pressed her palm to her chest, where phantom pain bloomed like a wound that wouldn't heal. Somewhere in the capital, Kai was learning to love his new wife, building the political alliance his kingdom needed, forgetting her completely. Maybe it's better this way, she whispered to the empty room. Her voice sounded foreign, rough from disuse. Because what had she been thinking? That love could conquer politics? That a servant girl could keep a king's heart when duty demanded otherwise? Foolish, naive, pathetic. The merchants had also brought news of unrest in the northern territories, of trade disputes and political tensions. The kingdom needed stability, and Kai's new queen would provide exactly that. Everything Aria never could. Her reflection in the frost-covered window showed a ghost of the girl who'd once believed in fairy tales. Hollow cheeks, dull eyes, skin pale as winter moonlight. She was disappearing piece by piece, and some traitorous part of her wondered if that wouldn't be a mercy. After all, what was left to live for? Thunder rumbled overhead, and Aria closed her eyes against tears that had become as constant as breathing. Soon after, even those would stop, because broken hearts could only beat for so long.
The marriage bed felt like a battlefield he'd already lost. Kai sat on the edge of the massive four-poster, staring at silk sheets that smelled wrong. Too sweet, too artificial, nothing like the wild honey scent that haunted his dreams. 2 weeks married, and he hadn't touched his wife once. Darling? Lynessa emerged from the adjoining chamber in a negligee that cost more than most people earned in a year. Beautiful, seductive, completely repulsive to his wolf. "I'm tired," he said automatically, the same excuse he'd used every night. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, the kingdom's needs are exhausting. The kingdom, always the kingdom, as if duty could warm a cold bed or fill the hollow ache where his heart used to be. Perhaps tomorrow, he offered, knowing it was a lie, because tomorrow would be the same as tonight. His body would refuse to respond to anyone who wasn't Aria. His wolf would retreat deeper into hibernation, and Lynessa would grow more frustrated with each rejection. Of course, she repeated, but ice crystallized around the words. After she'd retreated to her own chambers, separate rooms had been her suggestion. Thank the goddess, Kai stood and walked to the windows overlooking his territory. Somewhere out there, Aria was. What? Happy? Moving on? Dying by inches like he was? Because the truth he couldn't speak aloud was that the mate bond was killing him. Food tasted like ash, wine like water. Colors seemed muted, as if the world had lost half its vibrancy when she'd walked away. And it was his fault. His advisors were pleased, of course. Trade agreements stabilized. Northern territories fell in line. The political marriage was achieving everything they'd hoped. Everything except happiness. "Your Majesty?" A soft knock interrupted his brooding. "Enter." Marcus, his personal guard, stepped inside with obvious reluctance. "Forgive the intrusion, but there's been news. From the northern mountains. Aria." His wolf stirred for the first time in weeks, desperate and hopeful. "What news?" The words came out sharper than intended. Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "The village headman reports concerns about a woman living alone in the old hunter's cabin. Says she's not well. Not well." The careful words hit like hammer blows because he knew exactly what they meant. The mate bond worked both ways. If he was dying by inches, she was too. And unlike him, she was facing it alone. "Thank you," he managed. Dismissed. After Marcus left, Kai gripped the window frame until his knuckles went white. Because he'd made his choice. Duty over love. Kingdom over heart. So why did victory taste like poison? Soon after, he'd have to try again with Lynessa. Have to force his body to accept what his soul rejected. Because that's what kings did, even if it destroyed them.
The cliff's edge beckoned like an old friend. Aria stood on the rocky precipice, wind whipping her hair as she stared down at jagged stones 50 feet below. It would be quick, merciful. an end to the constant agony of existing without her other half. One step, that's all it would take. Her wolf remained stubbornly silent, offering no protest to what she was contemplating. Maybe it wanted this too. Maybe they were both tired of fighting a battle that had been lost the moment she'd walked away. He's forgotten you by now. The thought was meant to hurt, but instead it brought strange comfort. Because if Kai was happy with his new queen, if he'd moved on, then letting go wouldn't be betrayal. The anniversary of their first meeting had passed a week ago. 1 year since eyes had met across a moonlit garden and changed everything. 1 year since she'd believed in fairy tales. How young she'd been. How foolish. Snow began to fall, fat flakes that caught in her eyelashes like tears. The storm was getting worse, and if she didn't act soon, she'd freeze to death anyway. The cliff was simply faster, more dignified. She took a step forward, toes at the very edge of oblivion. Another step would. A howl split the night air, distant but unmistakable, wild and heartbroken. It echoed across the mountains like a soul in torment, and despite everything, despite weeks of silence, despite wanting to die, her wolf stirred. Listening, recognizing. Kai, impossible. He was hundreds of miles away, warm in his marriage bed with his beautiful new wife. But that howl, she knew that voice. Another answered from a different direction, then another. A pack in mourning, calling to the moon with voices that spoke of loss and longing. They were singing for their broken alpha. Tears froze on her cheeks as understanding crashed over her. Because the mate bond worked both ways, and if she could hear his pain across impossible distance, he was dying too. No, she whispered to the wind, because she couldn't let him suffer for her weakness, couldn't let her death destroy whatever happiness he'd managed to build. She had to live. For him. The step back from the edge felt like the hardest thing she'd ever done. But as another howl split the night closer now, as if drawn by some invisible thread, Aria turned away from oblivion and chose tomorrow instead.
The council meeting exploded into chaos. The northern clans are mobilizing, Lord Garrett announced, his face grim. They're questioning your majesty's fitness to rule. Fitness, as if weakness could be hidden behind political marriages and false smiles. What are their specific concerns? Kai asked, though he already knew the answer. Your inability to consummate your union with Queen Lanessa has become common knowledge, Lady Blackwood said delicately. There are whispers about curses, about the previous queen's influence. Aria, always Aria. Even exiled and forgotten, she haunted his reign like a beautiful ghost. The marriage is young, he said carefully. These things take time. 6 months? Lord Garrett's voice cracked like a whip. Your Majesty, the kingdom needs an heir. Stability. Not whatever this is. This. His complete inability to function as a husband to anyone but his true mate. His wolf's stubborn refusal to accept a replacement. His body's violent rejection of intimacy with the wrong woman. Perhaps, Lanessa said quietly, it's time to consider other options. Every head turned toward the queen, whose face remained carefully neutral. But Kai caught the calculation in her eyes, the way her hands clenched slightly in her lap. She knew exactly what she was suggesting. What other options? He asked, though ice was already forming in his veins. Annulment. The word dropped like a stone into still water. On grounds of incompatibility, Your Majesty could choose a more suitable bride. Another political marriage. Another attempt to force his heart into acceptable shapes. And what of you? He asked. Lanessa's smile was brittle as winter frost. I would survive, as I always have, by destroying what she couldn't have, because suddenly, pieces clicked into place. The convenient timing of every scandal that had driven him and Aria apart, the perfectly orchestrated betrayals, the anonymous letters that had poisoned their trust. Lanessa. She'd played them all like chess pieces, maneuvering them toward exactly this moment, where Kai's first marriage lay in ruins, and his second offered nothing but political convenience. No, he said quietly. The word fell into stunned silence. No, he repeated louder this time. No more political marriages, no more convenient lies. No more choosing duty over truth. He stood, and his alpha presence filled the room like a physical force, because he was done being weak. "Find her," he commanded Marcus, who stood guard by the door. "Your Maesta? Find Aria. Bring her home." His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. And if anyone in this room objects, he let the threat hang unfinished, because for the first time in months, his wolf was awake, alert, furious. Soon after, he would reclaim what he should never have let go, starting with his mate and ending with his crown.
The knock came at dawn, sharp and urgent against her cabin door. Aria startled awake from dreams of amber eyes and broken promises, her heart hammering as she struggled into a worn cloak. Who would brave mountain passes and winter storms just to reach her isolated refuge? Unless something terrible had happened. She opened the door to find Marcus, the Alpha King's personal guard, his face grim beneath frost-covered brows. Behind him stood a figure she barely recognized, Thomas, the stable boy, looking haunted and desperate. "Your Majesty," Marcus began formally. "Just Aria now," she corrected, stepping aside to let them escape the bitter cold. "What brings you so far from the capital?" Thomas moved forward with obvious difficulty, guilt written across every line of his face. "I can't live with it anymore. The lies. What they made me do. What who made him do. Tell her," Marcus urged quietly. "All of it." And suddenly, Aria was listening to a confession that shattered everything she'd believed about her exile. The staged attack. The blood that had been pig's blood, not his. The guard who'd paid him to play victim while she'd been set up to look guilty. Lady Lanessa orchestrated it all, Thomas finished, tears freezing on his cheeks. The letters, the rumors, that scene in the garden, everything designed to drive you apart. The words hit like physical blows. Lanessa, of course. Who else had motive and opportunity to destroy what she couldn't have? "Why are you telling me this now?" Aria asked, sinking onto her narrow bed as the revelations crashed over her. "Because the king is dying," Marcus said bluntly. "The mate bond it's killing him, has been for months, and when he learned the truth. Hope flickered in her chest like a candle flame, dangerous, warming, potentially devastating if extinguished again. "He sent you?" she whispered. "He commanded us," Marcus corrected. His exact words were, "Bring her home." Home. As if the palace had ever truly been hers. As if walking away hadn't been the hardest thing she'd ever done. What about his queen? The question tasted bitter. "Annulled," Thomas said quietly. "The marriage was never consummated. Lady Lanessa's been banished for treason. Justice at last." But even as relief flooded through her, doubt crept in its wake. Because months had passed, pain had been inflicted, trust had been shattered into fragments that might never fully heal. What if it was too late for them? "He's waiting," Marcus said gently, as if reading her thoughts. "Has been waiting since the moment you left, fighting his counsel, fighting politics, fighting everything that tried to keep you apart, finally fighting for her, the way she'd always dreamed he would." "How long to reach the capital?" she asked. Marcus's smile was the first genuine warmth she'd seen in months. 3 days if we leave now. 3 days to discover if love could survive betrayal, exile, and the wounds they'd inflicted on each other. Soon after, she would find out.
The evidence spread across his desk, like pieces of a poisonous puzzle. Kai stared at forged letters in handwriting that perfectly mimicked Aria's delicate script. Bank records showing payments to servants for special services, testimony from guards who'd been bribed to stage incidents and spread rumors, all of it leading back to Lanessa. "How long?" he asked the investigator, a discreet man who specialized in noble scandals. "Months of planning, Your Majesty. Maybe longer. This wasn't impulse, it was a calculated campaign to destroy your first marriage. And it had worked perfectly, because he'd been so ready to believe the worst. So convinced that happiness was something kings couldn't afford. He'd let paranoia and duty poison the most precious thing in his life. Like a fool. "She's been removed from the palace," he confirmed. "Escorted to the border under guard. Queen Lanessa's family has disowned her to protect their own standing. She won't be welcome in any noble house after this." Good. His wolf snarled with satisfaction. Justice for the woman who'd nearly destroyed them both through manipulation and lies. But justice wouldn't heal the wounds that had been inflicted, wouldn't erase months of separation and pain, wouldn't guarantee that Aria could forgive him for choosing duty over faith when it mattered most, because he'd failed her in every way that counted. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Enter. A young page appeared, nervousness radiating from every line of his small frame. Your Majesty, Cook wanted you to know the moonflowers in the royal garden have started blooming again. The moonflowers. Kai's breath caught because those ancient blooms only responded to Luna blood. They'd been dormant since Aria left, their silver petals closed tight as secrets. If they were opening, thank you, he managed. Dismissed. Alone again, hope bloomed in his chest, like those impossible flowers. Because Marcus should reach her soon, should be explaining everything, convincing her to return. If she would come, what followed was the longest wait of his life. Because he'd learned too late that crown and kingdom meant nothing without the right person to share them with. Soon, he would discover if love could survive the weight of his mistakes.
The palace looked different in winter moonlight. Aria stood at the garden gates, heart hammering as she stared at windows that glowed like golden eyes. 3 days of hard riding through mountain passes, 3 days of hope and terror warring in her chest. 3 days to decide if she was brave enough to risk her heart again. Your Majesty? Marcus waited patiently, understanding that this moment required courage she wasn't sure she possessed. Because walking through those gates meant facing everything, the pain, the mistakes, the love that had survived betrayal and exile. It meant choosing vulnerability over safety, hope over bitter experience. It meant believing in fairy tales one more time. The moonflowers, she whispered, staring at the garden where silver blooms caught starlight like captured dreams. They're blooming, Marcus confirmed. Have been since His Majesty learned the truth. Because they always had been hers. The flowers, the garden, the wolf that had awakened at first sight of amber eyes. All of it, calling her home despite every rational reason to stay away. Is he? She couldn't finish the question. Waiting in your chambers. Has been for hours. Her chambers. Not the queen's rooms that Lynessa had occupied, but the simple space where a servant girl had once believed in impossible things. What if I can't forgive him? The fear escaped before she could stop it. Marcus's smile was gentle. Then you'll tell him so. But Your Majesty, he's suffered too. The mate bond. I know. Because she'd felt every moment of his anguish across impossible distance. Had known, even in her darkest hours, that he was dying by inches just as she was. The bond that connected them had never truly been broken. Just buried beneath lies and manipulation and the terrible weight of believing themselves unworthy of happiness. Yet even so, doubt crept in like winter wind. Because loving someone and trusting them were different things entirely. And trust, once shattered, was harder to rebuild than kingdoms. But maybe, just maybe, it was worth trying. Despite that, her feet carried her through the gates, past gardens that whispered her name, toward a confrontation that would determine the rest of their lives. Because some things were worth fighting for, even if the battle might break what remained of her heart. The moonflowers turned their faces toward her as she passed, silver petals glowing like blessings in the darkness. Welcome home, they seemed to whisper, if she was brave enough to claim it.
Her scent reached him before her footsteps did. Kai stood frozen by the window of her old chambers, hardly daring to breathe as jasmine and wild honey filled the air like answered prayers. For months, he'd dreamed of this moment, planned what he'd say, how he'd explain. Now that she was here, words seemed impossibly small. The door opened with whispered hinges. She stood silhouetted in the doorway, travel-worn and beautiful and real, in ways that made his chest ache with relief. She came back. Hello, Kai. 2 words. Simple. Devastating. Because her voice carried echoes of every conversation they'd shared, every whispered confession under moonlight, every fight that had driven them apart. Aria. Her name felt like coming home. You look tired, hurt, beautiful, fragile, strong, terrible. A ghost of her old smile flickered across her lips. "Perfect," he said honestly. "You look perfect." Silence stretched between them like a bridge neither was certain could bear their weight. Because this moment held everything forgiveness or final goodbye, love reclaimed or lost forever. "Marcus told me," she said quietly, "about Linessa, the manipulation. I should have known." The words tore from his throat. "Should have trusted you instead of believing what you saw with your own eyes." She stepped into the room but maintained careful distance. Instead of listening to advisors whose job was protecting the kingdom, she was offering him absolution he didn't deserve. "I chose duty over love," he said instead, "politics over faith. I let fear make me weak when you needed me to be strong." Yes, the simple agreement hit like a physical blow. You did. No pretty lies, no easy forgiveness, just truth, clean and sharp as winter air. "Can you forgive me?" The question hung between them like a prayer. She was quiet for so long he wondered if she'd simply leave again. Choose safety over the risk of loving someone who'd already failed her once. Then she spoke. "I don't know," she whispered, and honesty was the most beautiful gift she could have given him. "But I'd like to try." To try. Not forgiveness, not yet, but possibility. Hope wrapped in careful words and offered like a fragile flower. "What do you need?" he asked. "From me, I mean. To try." Her smile was sad and hopeful and heartbreaking all at once. Time, truth, and the promise that if we do this, if we rebuild what was broken, you'll choose us. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Choose us. Not the kingdom, not politics, not the careful calculations that had driven them apart. Them, always, he vowed, and meant it with every fiber of his being, because some lessons only needed to be learned once. Soon after, he would prove those words with actions that mattered more than promises. But for now, having her here was enough. Almost.
The great hall erupted in chaos. Aria stood beside Kai's throne, fingers intertwined with his as evidence of Linessa's betrayal was laid bare before the assembled court. Letters, testimonies, bank records that painted a picture of manipulation so intricate it stole breath from noble chests. Yet even so, Linessa fought to the bitter end. "Lies," she declared from where guards held her in chains of silver and iron. Fabrications designed to excuse the king's poor judgment in choosing a servant over. "Enough!" Kai's voice cut through her protests like a blade, but it was Aria who stepped forward, meeting her former stepsister's venomous gaze without flinching, because she was done being afraid. "You drugged me," Aria said quietly, each word carrying the weight of months of suffering. "On the night of the mating ceremony, you stole my chance at happiness because you couldn't bear to lose. I saved the kingdom from your unsuitability." Linessa's mask finally slipped, revealing the bitter jealousy beneath. "You were nothing, a servant girl who got lucky. I was his mate." The words rang through the hall with absolute certainty. "Chosen by fate, not politics. And you nearly destroyed us both because you couldn't accept that some things aren't for sale." Truth blazed between them like wildfire, because looking at Linessa now, beautiful, connected, perfect in every way that mattered to courts and councils, Aria finally understood. They'd never been equals. Not in birth or breeding or political value, but love wasn't a competition with prizes for the most deserving. It was a gift that chose its own recipients, regardless of rank or worthiness. "Your Majesty," Lord Garrett spoke carefully, "what punishment befits such extensive treason?" Kai's hand tightened on hers, and she felt his wolf's desire for blood justice, for vengeance proportional to the pain inflicted. But Aria was tired of pain. "Banishment," she said before he could speak. "Permanent exile from all territories under the crown's protection. Let her live with the consequences of her choices." Gasps echoed through the hall because mercy was unexpected when betrayal ran so deep. "Aria," Kai murmured, "she deserves to learn that love can't be stolen or schemed into existence," she finished. "Some lessons are harder than death, and some victories were hollow if they cost your soul to claim them." As guards led Linessa away, her final, hate-filled glance promising this wasn't over, Aria felt something settle in her chest. Justice, not vengeance. Peace, not victory. And love that had survived its greatest test.
The private chambers felt sacred in candlelight. Kai sat across from Aria at their small dining table, sharing a simple meal that tasted like celebration after months of ash and emptiness. The Great Hall's drama had ended hours ago, but this quiet intimacy mattered more than any public vindication. This was what they'd fought for. "Do you regret it?" he asked, setting down his wine cup. "Showing mercy?" Aria considered the question with the thoughtfulness that had first drawn him to her. "No. She'll live knowing she lost everything through her own choices. That's punishment enough. Forgiveness without foolishness. Another reason why she was born to be his queen. The council will want to discuss our future," he said carefully, "because walking this path again required acknowledgement of past mistakes. Will you let them?" The question held weight beyond its simple words. Would he choose politics over love again? Would fear override faith when pressure mounted? No, the word came without hesitation. Never again. We're mates, Aria. That bond supersedes every law, every tradition, every political convenience they can manufacture. Her smile bloomed like sunrise. Even if it cost you support? Alliances, especially then. He reached across the table to capture her hand. "I spent months learning what kingdom means without the right queen to share it. Empty, hollow, a crown that weighs like chains instead of lifting like wings, because he'd finally understood the lesson that had taken too long to learn. A king without love was just a man with expensive responsibilities, but a king with his true mate beside him, that was magic that could reshape worlds. What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now we rebuild." He lifted their joined hands to his lips. "Not just us, though that comes first, but everything. The trust we broke, the future we almost lost. Together, always together, because some promises were meant to be kept. Yet even so, fragile hope flickered between them. They'd found their way back to each other, but scars remained. Trust would take time to fully heal, but they had time now. They had forever."
The moonflowers bloomed like fallen stars. Aria knelt among silver petals in the garden where everything had begun. Kai beside her under the same ancient oak that had witnessed their first stolen glances. But tonight was different. Tonight was choice, not chance. Tonight was forever. "Are you certain?" he asked, golden eyes reflecting starlight and something deeper. "We could wait. Take more time to—" "I'm certain." The words came from her soul, where doubt had been burned away by months of separation and pain. "We've had time, Kai. We've had truth. Now I want us. All of us. Completely. Without reservation." He cupped her face with reverence that made her chest ache with joy. "I love you, not because fate chose us, but because I choose you. Every day, every moment, for the rest of my life. I love you too." The words tasted like honey and promises. My king, my mate, my impossible, stubborn, magnificent man who finally learned to fight for what matters. When his lips found hers, the kiss tasted like coming home. But more than that, it tasted like beginning. Like the first page of a story they'd write together, free from manipulation and fear. The mating mark burned against her throat like liquid starfire. Not the desperate claiming of their first joining, but something deeper, chosen, celebrated, blessed by moonlight, and witnessed by flowers that sang their approval in silver whispers. "Mine," he growled against her skin. "Yours," she agreed. "Just as you're mine. Forever and always." Their wolves sang in harmony as the bond snapped into place, not broken and hastily repaired, but forged anew in fire and choice and love that had survived every test fate could devise. Soon after, the kingdom would learn its true queen had returned. But for now, in this garden, where fairy tales bloomed like moonflowers, they were simply themselves, two halves of a whole, finally complete. The ancient oak whispered blessings in wind song, and overhead, stars painted promises across velvet sky. This was how love stories were supposed to end, and how the greatest ones began. The baby's first cry echoed through the royal chambers like a song of joy. Aria cradled her daughter against her chest, tears streaming down her face as tiny fingers wrapped around hers with surprising strength. Perfect, beautiful, theirs. She has your eyes, Kai whispered, settling beside them on the bed with wonder written across every line of his face. And your stubborn chin? Aria laughed through tears. Poor thing doesn't stand a chance. But what a chance it would be. Through the windows, she could see the kingdom they'd built together stronger now, united not by political convenience but by leaders who'd learned that love was the foundation of everything worthwhile. The moonflowers in the garden bloomed year-round now, as if celebrating the happiness that had taken such effort to claim. What should we call her? Kai asked, stroking their daughter's downy hair with gentle reverence. Luna, Aria said without hesitation. For the moon that brought us together, and the flowers that knew we belonged to each other before we did. For the light that had guided them home through the darkest of times. Outside their windows, the kingdom celebrated. Not just the birth of an heir, but the triumph of love over politics, of choice over convention, of hope over fear. And in the garden below, moonflowers danced in evening breeze, their silver petals catching starlight like captured dreams. Some fairy tales, it turned out, were worth fighting for, especially the ones that began with the courage to choose love, even when the world insisted it was impossible. The Alpha King and his Luna Queen smiled at each other over their perfect daughter's head, and the future stretched before them like an endless garden of possibilities, all of them blooming bright as moonflowers under a benevolent sky. Her stepsister had drugged her sleep to steal her chance at love. But love, it turned out, was stronger than sleeping draughts, stronger than politics, stronger than every force that tried to keep true mates apart. And in the end, that made all the difference.